I know, it's been a long time, and I apologize about that, but we're back. We should be back on a much more consistent schedule due to real life things just not panning out the way you think they would. But I'm back to you here with the next chapter of the Veil Riders of Book 2. Now, some quick housekeeping we got to put up right now. We still have affiliation with Redcon 1, who can do all your protein and supplement needs for those of you who need to get gains as fast as possible and most efficiently. We're still affiliated with Skull Splitter Dice with all their dice packs, their cool sets. They got new stuff coming out as well, too, and they're pretty fucking bonkers, and you guys should definitely check them out. Skull Splitter Dice got a lot of good shit. Thirdly, the book is out. So the first Veil Rider book is out for purchase on Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, and through the coffee. Now here's what may kind of trip you up. So if you buy a book through the coffee, obviously I get more money. Because, I'm paying for the book, I get, blah, 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 blah. But it takes longer to ship because I got to do it. And that's really the only... And the other downside is that it doesn't report to book sales for like their tiers and lists and all the goofy bullshit. If you buy through Amazon, I get a smaller cut due to royalties, but it will ship faster, and those sales report to the ranking system in their little book catalog, and the more you buy off Amazon, the higher I go, the more page time I get, but the usual YouTube, Amazon algorithm bullshit that goes on. Buy the Barnes & Nobles, same thing. So how you want to get your book is completely up to you. The only way to get a signed copy is either through coffee or meeting me at a con or at Nugget Fest or out in the wild, that kind of stuff. However, if you just want to book fast and easy, just go through Amazon or Barnes & Nobles. You can get it within a few days compared to me having to order the book in. We'll say around a book, I got to order the book in, got to put it in the mail slip, send it out to you, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, so the second book is out. I think we are currently ranked. Let's find out here. Always fun kind of checking out where the ranking is because it goes up and down like every day. Let's see. We are currently ranked number 7,000. Hell yeah. In war, military fiction action, in 695, 127, and books in general. So we're doing good, all things considered. But yeah, sorry for the radio silence. Some things happened. I wouldn't recommend them, and they should be done now. So it'd be one chapter of the Veil Riders, 2 chapters of Emily Bronze coming up, and then back to 2 chapters of the Veil Riders. And I hope I see you there. Chapter 7, Information Shift. When sleep finally came for Yule, it was like blinking from one scene to the next, not even a lapse of light or a tone of blackness. He was sitting in an old gallery of some kind, along which windows sat every 10 feet, moonlight pouring in through the tall, paneless arched windows. He could hear snow falling, the soft hush as millions of flakes came into contact with the ground and settled amongst their past fallen kin. In the dream, he sat there for hours on an old threadbare rug, legs crossed and eyes staring at the time-worn walls of stone and its empty shelves. Time stretched on as the snow fell, until he heard a noise behind him, the soft steps of bare feet shushing across the old rug. Yule turned his head just enough to the left so she came into view, and he stared at her as she sat down beside him, stretching out her legs in front of herself as her armor clinked and settled. Yule inhaled slowly through his slitted lips as Cringia reached up with a hand and ruffled her hair, and he felt his skin prickle in goosebumps when she looked at him with her piercing white eyes. "Haunting my dreams now, are you?" Yule murmured, and leaned back so he was sitting up straight, hands held loosely in his lap. Cringia smiled warmly.
"Would you prefer I showed up in person again? You seem to enjoy my company so."
"You ruined a perfectly good death is what you did."
"If I hadn't brought you back, you wouldn't have fallen in love again. Would that be preferable?"
Cringe asked, and she saw Yule's face harden at the words. Yule looked at her, his tired blue eyes reflecting in her own. I'm not in love. I have deep feelings of affection with another person and desire their affection back. I do not deserve to love. Cringe leaned back on her hands, laying her head on the shoulder nearest to Yule as she watched him.
I've been in your head, human. You cannot blame yourself for the death of your previous wife, but I am not here to speak of that or your current lover, despite how curious she is.
Despite how curious she is? What do you mean? Yule asked lowly, and he turned his head towards her fully now. She smiled at him in a smug manner, slowly rocking her feet from side to side as if warming them in front of a fire, but looked back towards the wall.
You've killed 2 so far, Eriloth Blueflight and Almer Tornless. Not bad, but it could be better.
Yule glanced towards the wall where she was looking and saw that it was no longer bare. 2 hats now stood on the wall on a little shelf. Colonel Tornellis's field cap was singed as if it had been caught by a small fire, while the officer's dress hat of Aerolith Blueflight sat next to it, spatterings of gold-flecked blood still staining it from where he had coughed blood onto it. He flicked his eyes back to Cringe, who had somehow found a pear and was now happily chewing on it. He watched her closely as she ate the pear, her own eyes locked onto his as she chewed, and the silence stretched on, only broken by the sound of fruit flesh being ground under her jaws. Is this why I'm here? As your hand? Cringe slowed her chewing down to a thoughtful pace and ran the back of her thumb along her bottom lip, cleaning a little bit of juice away with a flick of nail-on skin.
In a way.
She said nothing else, so Yule just sat and waited until she finished her pear. He peered at Tornellis's patrol cap, one eye squinted as he remembered how foolish he had been to try and take on a magic caster with just his knife. But he was dragged out of his memory when Cringe cocked back her arm and winged her barren core out the window with a clank and churn of armor. Yule turned his head and watched it sail out into the snow-flecked air and noticed that he did not hear any sort of impact whatsoever. Yule stayed staring at the window, just waiting for the god next to him to say something. In time, she did.
I cannot kill them. I need you to.
Why me? Cringe looked out the window with Yule, still wiggling her feet back and forth idly.
Because of your rage. Never before have I met a human with such anguish and hatred in their heart. Even my elder flower agrees that your fury is worth marking.
Why do you have such a lady murder boner for Faye? Cheat you at a card game or something? Yule said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his folded knees. Cringe laughed airily, and Yule could sense the small tones of hurt.
No, if only it was something so simple. Fae, you see, hate gods. They cannot control gods, and only gods can muster power more overwhelming than their own, and a god they hated most of all.
She pointed at herself, lightly tapping the pad of her index finger against a little skull at the center of her breastplate.
Was me.
Yule patiently waited for her to continue as she stared out the window, and he hoped that this at least counted as a REM cycle. Cringe spoke after a few moments, and she sounded like she was trying to hold back a choked sob. The emotion caught Yule off guard, and he turned his body towards her out of reflex.
They killed them all during their first war. I was a god who chose to walk among her people and built them a magnificent city to live in, to thrive in. Disciples of death and life, of the heavens and hells. It was majestic, the seat of my power and my happiness.
Yule's face tightened and he clenched his jaws as he listened, and his eyebrows furrowed as her emotions began to invade him. It was as white as moonlight and as hot as a coal fire, burning along his skin as her rage and pain began to rise like a bullet from a barrel.
They killed them all. They destroyed my city and my people in an attempt to remove me from the equation altogether and rule death for themselves.
Cringe balled up her fists so tightly that the leather groaned with the strain, and her eyes glowed with such brightness it became hard to look at.
They must pay. They must pay. You saw what they are like!
She roared and slammed her fist onto the stone floor beneath, the faces of the tiles shattering under her knuckles.
You see what they do!
Yule grimaced as his skin now began to burn, and he could see actual steam beginning to rise from his flesh. His own fists balled as the visages of a time long past flooded into his brain, of people being cut down by the thousands by laughing figures wreathed in flame, wielding crushing water and ice to smite those who stood in their way. He saw a city burning in horrid magical flame, the screams of the dying and the wounded, and the delighted cackles of Fae in their bloodlust and revelry.
I need your rage, a bitterness only equal to mine. I will wield you like a hammer to achieve my revenge because I cannot!
Wait! Yule wheezed, and he opened his eyes wide as more of her history roared through his skull. His blood felt like it was going to start boiling, and his vision swam with rapidly flashing stars and pinlights. Erinda was roaring now, standing up straight as she stared out the window, her fingers clutching the stone so tightly it crackled and shattered under her touch. Her cloak billowed from an unknown and unfelt wind, her eyes glowing with such passion that it was blinding.
You will destroy them all, Yule. You will crush them beneath your boot heels just as they did my city. They must all die, Yule. They must die.
The screams of her dying followers and the death throes of her city hurtled across his brain. His eyes saw the mutilated and cursed corpses, and he smelled the burning char of the bodies and the copper tang of the blood running in the streets. Yule began to bellow in rage as Erinda's own emotions flooded him, and they both howled together at the defilement they had both suffered from the Fae. Erinda having lost her dream, and Yule having lost his men and women of Cosmoline Company, of his way home, and for all he knew of his home itself. The ground underneath Yule began to shake from their combined voices, and he took one last look at Erinda, her fur plain upon her eyes, her face the unshakable visage of a goddess on the warpath, and he stood, looking at the goddess eye to eye. He was about to say something, to make his oath right then and there, when he felt something give him a little tug. He looked down at his knee and saw an odd-looking tendril curl around his leg just to give him another small tug. Erinda began to laugh angrily, her scorching white eyes looking over his shoulder, and Yule looked up at her in time to watch her bare heel connect with his chest. Yule lurched awake fiercely, the recoil of his body flicking away the beads of sweat from his skin as he came to a halt in a sitting position on the bed. Besides the pain in his chest and the mad thudding dance of his heart, he felt two hands gripping him. One hand had him by the neck, while the other was on his stomach, both of which felt warm and familiar on his winter-bit skin. Yule heaved in and out, having to fight to get the air into his lungs as they spasmed. He remembered from the dream that the goddess had kicked him right in his fucking chest, and it felt like it too. The last time he had taken a hit that felt this bad was when he had taken 3 7.62x39 rounds to the chest plate during a room clearing in the desert, and he had been on point. Somehow, this felt worse, and it took a few minutes until he felt like his lungs could handle the task of talking. Even then, when he spoke, little puffs of fog crept out of his mouth, as if he were speaking on a chilly spring morning. "Bad dream," Yule murmured, and placed a hand over Olivara's own hand on his stomach. Olivara worked her fingers in between his and scooted closer to press her body against his. As she did, her nightshirt became quickly soaked by his sweat. Olivara still wasn't sure how he would handle knowing that she knew all of what went on during the ending half of that dream, so she slow played it to test the water.
What kind of dream? You started sweating and were gritting your teeth so hard I could hear them in my own sleep.
Yule blinked a few times, then put his other hand on top of hers, as if holding her hand to his stomach with both of his own. Just bad memories is all, nothing to worry about. They thought to themselves that while this answer was not an outright lie, both of them knew it was definitely something to be worried about. As the realization of what he was about to do drew upon him, Olivar began to slowly unwind her tendrils from around Yule, as she was starting to feel the frosty touch of Crinja dig into them. She had been awoken from her own sleep by the sudden pulse of rage emanating from Yule, and when she was finally able to rouse herself and turn to check on him, his skin had begun to coat with frost, and every puff of breath from his nose or mouth was heavy with winter fog. Thankfully, Crinja was distracted with Yule, and she had been able to work her way inside their suddenly combined minds. Their shared grief and anger washed over her in waves, and she felt that at times she was about to be swallowed up in it herself. It had been an odd sensation, dragging up old feelings from her failed relationships, slights, even down to the bullies of her youth that made her life hell for having red hair. The emotions were so strong they pushed against her tendrils like the swells of a beach, and it was only by luck she had been able to shoot a single tendril forward and grab a hold of Yule. Somehow, she had been able to ground Yule and snap him back from Crinja's hold, and she remembered the terror that gripped her soul when Crinja saw her looking in upon them, and the angry laugh that threatened to break her mind with its force. When Olivara pulled, it threatened to pull Crinja with them as she had been trying to connect her own ties to Yule. To fully disconnect, she had raised up her foot and kicked Yule away, throwing Olivar and Yule out from her realm of mind and back out into their own bedroom. Olivara did not enjoy the experience. If it hadn't been for her concern of Yule's own health, she would have emptied her stomach over the sheets. Even now, she could feel her stomach boiling with bile, and she didn't want to worry Yule. When the last of the cold left Yule's body and was replaced with the warmth of Olivara, quickened by the elf shedding her sweat-soaked nightshirt and laying on top of Yule, Yule wrapped his arms around her bare back and the two lay there for another hour, each holding the other as closely as they could. Yule could still smell the charred bodies and destruction of Crinja's city on his nose, and even as he felt Olivara's nose in his neck, he saw the flashes of burning buildings, the shadows of dancing flames, and the ever-grinning faces of the greater Fae that brought the city low. Yule brought his own face down into the nest of Olivara's red hair and inhaled, trying to steal away the smells of his dreams with a sense of reality, and slowly the char smell faded. Neither of them felt in the mood to take things any further than cuddling, and they rose from the bed and began to dress after a time. The morning of Yule's meeting with Crinja passed by smoothly, and he took breakfast with Olivara in Chickely's room. The harpy was elated to see Yule, the healing having been quickened by both gold spent on good healers and Olivara wicking away whatever other pain there was so the harpy could more enjoy his time with Yule. Chickely had an odd request, but Yule allowed it, as no one else could see and it would help with the emotional damage Chickely suffered. Both Olivara and Yule sat on the floor on cushions, the two sitting side by side, but Yule sat with his legs outstretched in a V shape. Chickely sat in between Yule's legs with his back against the human's chest, his own chest and legs still wrapped in bandages that peeked out from under his clothes. But this was how Chickely wanted to take his breakfast, and Yule didn't have the heart to tell him no. Olivara found it cute that Yule would rest his tea mug on top of the harpy's head as Chickely happily chewed on oatmeal, as Yule had nowhere else to rest it. Chickely still had a week on bed rest and unhappily washed as Yule and Olivara left the room with dishes in hand. 5 Brunin says he won't last 3 days, Yule said as they walked down the hallway, and Olivara laughed.
3 days is being generous. I don't think he'll last 2.
The two chuckled and met up with a groggy Mockerat who had just ambled down the stairs, boots clutched in a hand. The day went as smoothly as it could, and all Yule had to do was busy work. Olivara Mockerat left him to go journey and spend money around the city, which left Yule to tend to leadership duties. He couldn't help but laugh at how quickly the garrison post was being built, as he had hired enough carpenters that it was like a hive of ants swarming over each other to make a bridge. A lot of the craftsmen were taking this time to do artistic works on door frames, gatehouses, and warehouses to mark them as their own creation, and it looked good as far as Yule could tell. The short wall around the compound they had constructed also sported artistic reliefs, most of which were animals or renditions of the vehicles still parked in rows outside of the inn. In the afternoon, more trucks arrived with supplies and fuel, many of which had bullet holes or shattered glass windows from pot shot attacks on the road here. Escorting them were a new shipment of 30 Sonderkraft Fahrzeug 234s, these with actual working turrets and a smaller 50mm L60 cannon. Yule wasted no time in sending them out to reinforce the skirmish positions arranged around the city, and all of their brim-touched crews were more than happy to get into the thick of it as soon as possible. The drivers of the supply trucks also updated Yule on the conditions of the road here. Ambushes and pecking attacks are becoming commonplace, and due to this, Piper had begun sending troops with the trucks to be dropped off in intervals along the road. These small camps were quickly turning into combat outposts all along the road, even allowing drivers to take small layovers and sleep in peace. After this, Yule made his way to the command truck to find Gremlin, and jerked open the door only to slam it back shut as soon as he had opened it. "Can't you hang a helmet on the door or something?" Yule called out to the two scrambling bodies inside, and after a few minutes Gremlin called out to Yule that it was safe to enter. Gremlin was breathless and flushed in the face as she gestured towards the screens and radios in front of her, and Yule pinched the bridge of his nose when he saw that she had cross-buttoned her fly.
We were just, calibrating the radio dishes and reaching out to the observation pickets. Yes.
Fino began, still trying to tuck in his own sweaty undershirt.
We just got them running this morning.
Yule crossed his arms, hand rubbing at his cheek as he looked at the desk. He could see where Gremlin had been sitting bare-ass naked on it, as well as the impressions of Fino's thighs against the stacks of reports scattered around the desk, and he looked towards the panting pair. "I'm sure it was difficult looking at the screens with Gremlin in front of you." The two sheepishly looked to each other and then down at the desk, and Gremlin reached over, shuffling some papers to quickly cover up her butt prints. Yule stared at her blankly, eyebrows raised and lip tight. "Anyway, everyone doing okay?"
Yes.
They both chirped, and Yule shook his head. "All right, well, let me know if anything changes. Also, let them know we got in some new vehicles and I'm sending a few to each OP. Also, Fino, give Gremlin her uniform jacket back." Fino and Gremlin both looked down to see they had indeed been wearing the wrong uniform tops, the name tags not matching their current bearers. Yule turned, opening the door. "And, carry on, I guess, you fucking weirdos." He stepped out back into the sunshine and closed the door behind him, and didn't even wait to hear what the hell was going on inside. He got only a few yards before he heard the voice of Prince Nim call out to him, and he groaned, stopping on his heel and turning his head slightly.
Mr. Yule, I was hoping I'd catch you out and about.
Nim cried, and began jogging towards the human. "That's one of us," Yule murmured, but turned and hooked his thumbs in his pockets. Today, Nim had his proper bodyguard around him, a small platoon of rather serious-looking Alberdand elves that radiated proper martial prowess. They all held glaives on their shoulders, wicked-looking blades that were broad and well-pointed, while their armor matched Prince Nim's almost to a T. They jogged behind the prince until he stopped before Yule, and his bodyguard began looking around for any threat that may be nearby. One of them saw the slight rocking of the command truck and nudged his buddy with his elbow, and the two shared a glance. Yule pressed down his patrol cap and the amulet with it. He hadn't used it much, so the blood was still in good supply. "Don't mind the truck, gentlemen, just a pair of stupid kids in there. Prince Nim, how can I be of service?" Service for the day mostly entailed the two sharing lunch at a small cafe in the upper-class side of town. the owner of whom blanched as soon as the figure of Yule passed through the door. Yule found the chairs and food too dainty for his taste, but the chef was up to the task of creating heartier fare for the human. While Nim happily ate the more refined and heavily spiced foods, Yule instead partook in more simple foods brought out from the kitchen, such as whole grain bread, freshwater trout, and a rather nice soup made from root vegetables. Nim caught sight of this early on, and happily laughed as he gestured with his three-pronged fork.
Mr. Yule, why do you insist on eating like a commoner? You are the commander of a very large army. Is it not customary in your lands?
Yule tore off a hunk of bread and lightly swirled it in his soup. No, not for my rank. Besides, there are reasons why the common folk can bear the weight a royal cannot. He made a direct look at Prince Nim as he tossed the soup-soaked bread hunk into his mouth, and he rested both of his forearms onto the table, folding his fingers together. Compared to the elven prince, Yule looked as if his arms were twice the size of the elf's, and Prince Nim nodded once. Fork perched on his lips as he took in the words.
Well, I will keep that in mind. Anyway, I brought you here to ask you about drilling my own standing on here into the same kind of troopers you have in your own.
Nim twirled his fork slyly, asking Yule for the word without asking for it aloud. Division.
Yes, division. They're not bad men-at-arms by any means, but in comparison to my father, I am far too underweight in terms of manpower. I'm going to need your help in maximizing their effectiveness.
Yule uncrossed his hands as an elven woman approached with a new mug of tea, and he nodded to her with a small smile before taking it from her hands. She bowed slightly and smiled in return before making her way towards the kitchen. Yule turns attention back to Nim. You say that as if you expect him to attack.
That is because I do.
Nim said seriously, and Yule watched with lowered eyelids. He took a small sip from his mug before setting it back down the tabletop, letting the sweet and herbal liquid drift over his tongue before swallowing. I bet you have a huge speech in your head already, lined up to try and persuade me to fight with you. You've probably spent the last day or so mulling over it, picking out the best words and ways to explain yourself, but I don't have the patience for such things. Yule pulled out a scratched-up M9 pistol out of its holster and set it on the table in front of Nim. The elven royal's bodyguards all suddenly perked up, having been sitting around them at their own tables without eating, and Yule heard them grip their glaives. He made no move to acknowledge them, and he sighed. In the end, you are going to be asking me to risk the lives of my men and women for you, for your people, and your little slice of country to keep it away from your father's influences. Now answer me. Do you have what it takes to take this pistol and shoot your father between the eyes? Prince Nim swallowed hard, fork poised in the air in shock from Yule placing down the pistol, and the small piece of meat on it vibrated slightly as Nim's hand gave a quiver.
What do you mean?
When it comes between what you want for your people and the family you have, are you willing to kill them? Your brothers may join against you, all of them combined to take you down and pound you into the dirt for your insolence. If given the chance of victory with a single bullet, would you put it in your father's brain? Prince Nim set down his fork, eyes locked on the pistol on the table, and he swallowed again before speaking.
Wrong
answer, Yule said flatly, and picked his pistol up off the table as he stood. Prince Nim looked up in panic as Yule turned to leave and jumped up from his seat.
Wait, Yule,
Yule paused, hands still gripping his pistol, but he did not turn his head.
Yes, if I must.
Yule tilted his head to the side and slowly turned, his boots thudding on the ground. And your brothers? Prince Nim paused far longer than he did when mulling over his father, and his face hardened.
Yes, if I must.
Sit down, Prince, Yule replied, and sat back down at the table. To be fair, he really wanted to finish the trout and soup, and had hoped the prince would fall for his goading. We have some things to discuss that you're not going to like, and we're going to have to go in depth over your father's ties with the chosen children and the Fae. You are going to have to tell the truth. Understand? Prince Nim sat back down slowly in his own chair, and after letting his heart settle, nodded once. Good. Now tell me about your brothers. Their discussion lasted several hours as Nim outlined the minds of his brothers, and Yule was annoyed to learn there were in fact 8 of them in total, Nim being the youngest at number 9. 6 of the brothers were martial in mindset and led their own small armies in lockstep with their father, forming the main wedge of the military might of Alterac. The brothers in question were Yannan, Almer, Phaler, Falmer, Fulmer, and Talion, all of whom had been drilled and trained as warriors since they were strong enough to hold a glaive. The other 2 brothers were not those of a warrior soul and were instead scholars and book learners. Piravin and Dakath, in Nim's opinion, shouldn't be in the field, but may be forced to by their father in order to keep up appearances. Yule agreed that they would be on the field in order to apply more psychological pressure onto Nim, but wasn't sure if they would be safe. Nim then explained that over the course of the months before Yule's arrival, the chosen children were worming their way into Alterac with promises of weapons and powers gifted to them from the Fae, as well as the riches from the other kingdoms once they were taken over and annexed into what they were calling Greater Alterac.
My father has had great ambitions of fully controlling the Darkwood and sweeping through the brim-touched clans in the mountains to the northwest, then binding the Kartik and Centaurs into military service and using them for labor as well. The Fae have already gifted him with a pistol of his own, as well as some kind of vehicle that he drives around the capital. Then Yinin was gifted with the ability of creating light with his hands. To say they are in thrall would be an understatement, and I would not be surprised if they thought of you being here as a direct challenge in a way to make themselves worthy of greater gifts.
Yule didn't like the sound of that, but he also knew he had an entire division of troopers beside him, and the spark-throwing brother wouldn't be so chuffed of himself when catching a Stug high-explosive round to the chest. After ironing out the training for Prince Nim's garrison and a few other aspects of modern warfare, Yule shook Nim's hand, and the 2 parted ways in the street. Nim made his way back to his keep with his bodyguard, while Yule made his own way to the Ruffled Magpie. Once his NCOs were mustered along with any other auxiliary NCOs that were needed, Yule let them all know what he had learned from Nim. Plans were set for the OPs to be enlarged and dug in with trenches, as well as digging in Stugs and Pumas for artillery support. Mortars would also be set out into the OPs for more firepower, as well as a fire base being set up in Tallwheat as a catch-all for most of the OPs that would be in range. More money was exchanged to certain homeowners who had tall buildings, and machine gun nests were planned to adorn their roofs, as well as sniper posts that would fall under command of chicks. Any and all brush-feathered were rounded up for use as forward observers and quickly kitted out for the task, including their own flare guns and debut rifles that had been modified for their use. With these plans in place, Yule dismissed everyone and set out to task before realizing it was well into dusk and wondered where the day had gone. Olivara arrived back at the inn with Makarat, flushed with happiness around the time Yule had ordered his dinner, and he was quickly dragged out of the Ruffled Magpie and down the street to the still-in-construction garrison post. Even still, carpenters and laborers walked back and forth with tools or materials, and Yule guessed they must be using a night shift in order to get the work done faster. They facilitated this with magic users that created balls of floating light that bubbled and bobbed in the air, sometimes needing run down, caught, and brought back to the areas where they were needed. Gusts of wind would catch them and drag them away when those in need of them weren't paying attention, and the baubles of light seemed cheeky as they slowly went on their own adventures. "Olivara, where are we going?" Yule asked, as the elf hadn't stopped tugging his arm every time he tried to slow down or look around. She flashed him a smile and jostled him.
You'll see.
Yule rolled his eyes, as he hated when people did this, but he humored her as he dragged him around and through the busy workers. He could see that auxiliary troopers had already taken up posts inside the furnished guard towers, and he gave them a wave when he caught their eye. Olivara only stopped tugging when they arrived in front of the main garrison building. It was a handsome wood and stone building with tall windows that matched the overall military aesthetic Yule had asked for, having had gremlins show them period-matching barracks of their own world as well as the more modern buildings of American military bases. The large, castle-worthy double doors were still being fitted, and the 2nd Division Zone Dwarven engineers were helping show them how to run wire through the walls for electric power. Yule only had a moment to take in the sight before Olivar began dragging him further along the small path towards another small building, a cozy-looking two-story cottage that had the emblem of the Veil Riders carved above the door. The building was fully complete, even having had the windows installed and a generator happily humming nearby. "What is this?" Yule asked, gesturing towards the building with a hand. Olivara giggled happily and gestured with both of her hands.
It's your place. They made it for you and guests.
Yule stared at the building. One eye squinted as he thought, and he gestured towards the inn in the distance. "But we already have a room."
Oh, Yule.
Olivara sighed, and again grabbed Yule by the arm and dragged him inside. Olivara, it appeared, had been busy furnishing the place with simple furniture the entire day when she had learned of its creation, and judging by the set of Makarot passed out on a pillow, Kentucky snoring in a chair, a trio of male Oni auxiliaries sleeping on a sofa, and a few other human lone wanderers playing cards at a coffee table, she had been enlisting the help of others to get everything moved in on the quiet. The humans playing cards looked up at Yule, then all shouted out in greeting, most of them smoking cigars or pipes in their floral shirts. "Hey, boss! Look, they made you your own building. One step further and you're more or less an officer," said Grouch, who had taken his boots off and was sitting sprawled out on the ground in his kilt. "Dangerous words for someone in kicking height," Yule replied, and the rest of the humans chuckled. A female human who he knew as Violet thudded her way down the stairs with a bottle of wine in her hand, and she waved the other in greeting.
"Hey, boss. Your future wife needed our help moving your new bed in. She's a real whip driver, that one,"
Violet chirped, and took a small swig from the bottle. Violet sported auburn hair cut short on the sides except for a shock that sat on top, usually draped over one side of her head or the other. Violet had been a welder before joining the Veil Riders, and sported arms and legs that would put most men to shame. She was also quite a handsome woman, with steel-colored eyes that were as hard as her grip. She wore the same kind of luau shirt as the rest of the Lone Wanderer humans, but she made a point of wearing nothing underneath and leaving a few buttons tactfully undone to show off her stomach muscles. Prince Nim had called her terrifying, but that didn't stop him from staring when the humans strolled by. "Violet, good to see you. I see you're still not wearing the uniform undershirts I spent a lot of money on developing, getting made, manufacturing." Yule drawled, and looked around at the sitting room they were all in.
"They're itchy."
"Right." Olivara took his hand.
Come, I want to show you our bedroom.
"Our bedroom?" Yule asked, but Olivara stuck out her tongue at him and pulled him up the stairs. Yule almost feared to ask how much she had spent on the bed, and already made a note to line up more secrets to sell the dwarves and Emil Norris. Olivara happily flopped on it and rolled from side to side.
So fluffy.
She moaned, and gathered up the top blanket into her arms as if she had never felt a comforter before. Yule snorted and made note that this room also had its own washroom, as well as holes already pre-fitted for a lavatory system. "What about our stuff?" Yule asked. But Olivara pointed a toe at a large closet, of which was already full of his clothes and uniforms.
Already taken care of, my love. I even folded them while you were out.
Yule placed his hands on his hips as he looked at the closet, and he muttered out in a low voice, "The room at the inn was just fine."
Yes, but this room is better.
She crooned, and happily kicked her legs up and down from on top of the bed. "How much did this cost?"
Nothing. Prince Nim took care of it and is the one who requested the building be built for you. They're even installing a bath.
"Olivara, we're not always going to be here." Olivara stopped kicking her legs for a moment, one leg held in the air, then began kicking them again.
Well, yes, but it was free and we're going to be here till we leave, so, yeah.
"You're ridiculous and spoiled," Yule replied with a laugh, and caught her right heel when she kicked it up into the air. Olivara gave her foot a wiggle.
Nonsense. Plus Chickley and Eris have rooms here to be your runners. There are also other rooms here for Makarot and anyone else you want bunked around you.
"How many rooms?"
10? 12? This is a large house, and I think I counted 10.
Yule groaned in annoyance and found himself once again rubbing at his eyes. What on earth? What was wrong with the room in the Magpie? Olivara looked at him unwaveringly.
It smelled. It's an inn room. This one is clean.
As she said this, she moved her arms up and down as if trying to make a blanket angel on top of the bed. What are you talking about? They cleaned the room before we ever went into it, Yule said roughly. It was now seriously pondering just how much all this was going to actually cost him. After all, no gift from royalty comes without strings attached, whether in the wrapping or the delivery. Olivara's retort was cut short by a shout from downstairs, and she sat up quickly. Yule, releasing her heel, and made his way out the door at a range stride. Olivara quickly stepped after him, and they both thumped down the stairs at a rapid staccato down to the main sitting room. Yule jabbed a finger when he saw the figures pushing past the door, and he barked out in anger. "You! No way! Domino, you know how I feel about her." "Aw, come on, boss. She isn't going to hurt anything," Domino cried out. And Severus bristled next to him as she became alert to the fact that Yule was talking about her.
Feel about Severus? Is Yule implying Queen of Himalayas not welcome here when Eris sleeps on chair?
Severus gestured angrily with a wing at Eris, who was happily kipping in a large plush chair, and had now cracked open an eye to see what all the hubbub was about. Domino held his fist under his chin and looked up at Yule from where he stood on the stairs, pursing his lips in a mockingly upset manner. "Yeah, boss, and she's my +1. Are you saying you aren't going to allow her to share a room with me after all this time together?" Olivara gave a small chuckle from beside Yule, as Severus had fluffed herself up to extreme poof levels in her sudden anger, while Yule gave the impression that he would have looked the same if he had had feathers.
Yule, I wouldn't worry. Besides, she's good for Domino's health. She stands on his blind side and keeps him safe.
Yule spoke in a low, angry tone. "I am sure it's a closet somewhere we can stick her in."
Darling,
Olivara murmured and poked Yule in the side.
I don't know what you hate about her, but she's currently attached to one of your sergeant majors. It would be as if Domino had issues with me being in the same building as him.
"Of which I don't," Domino called out, and he quickly hugged Severus to his side, and she looked up at Domino with a glare. He gave her a little jostle of the shoulder, and she let down her hackles an inch or two.
See? He has no issues. Why should you?
Olivara said, and gave Yule's arm a soft pat. Of course, she knew full well why Yule hated Severus, as it stemmed from her overall attitude, and for some reason she caused him to get nervous and a smidge fearful of the woman. Even now, as she caressed his mind, all she could hear him thinking was, "You stupid fucking bird," over and over again as the two glared at each other. Severus, on the other hand, was still pissed that Yule still treated her as below him, as well as smarting from his clear and resolute disdain for her, which meant that she would never be able to cement her hold as both Queen of the Himalayas and Queen of Cosmoline Company. Olivara couldn't help but smile at the two of them, then had to stifle a giggle as she felt the mind of Domino, who was just wondering if there's any food in the place and if the closets could fit all of his gear. Yule and Severus continued to glare at each other while everyone else looked on awkwardly, and Yule only spoke after Olivara cleared her throat politely and gave him another nudge with her elbow. Fine. The bird woman can stay here."
Bird woman? I am Queen of the Himalayas.
Severus moved to lurch forward, claws poised for Yule, but she was quickly swept up in the thickly muscled arms of Domino, who smiled brightly as Severus squirmed and raged in his arms. "Thanks, boss. I saw a nice room on the east side. Should give us a nice sunrise every morning, huh, darling?" Severus glowered up at him with red-hot eyes that were flecked with rage and indignation, but a small kiss to the top of her forehead seemed to pour water on those coals, and she grumbled from underneath his arms. It must have been some kind of affirmation as Domino chirped, "That's the spirit," and hefted her up into a princess carry as they went up the stairs. As Severus passed by Yule in the arms of Domino, Yule wrapped his arm around Olivara's waist in order to give her the bird with his middle finger, at which Severus gave him every middle claw and talon she could in return. Olivara looked up at Yule and gave him a reproachful glance, but Yule and Severus continued their middle-digit duel all the way until the two broke line of sight. It didn't take much time for the majority of the rooms to be filled with humans, many of whom bunked together just as they had been on the road, and at times 5 to 6 to a room. These were the larger rooms, and bunks were quickly built and affixed so that humans could sleep comfortably and not on the floor as they were. Even a few of the higher auxiliary NCOs came to bunk inside the house in the same fashion as the humans when they were invited, and it took very little time for the house to become the center of military matters in the mornings. Royal cooks from Prince Nim's own kitchens were sent down to staff and work to keep the inhabitants fed, and found the humans' taste for food to be far below their own caliber. Despite this, the cooks came to enjoy making the simpler fare, and were always surprised when ordered to breakfast with the entire command staff when there were no meetings on for the morning. The larger building next door was finished in record time, and even the dwarven engineers had to whistle at the breakneck speeds the multiple crews worked at. Even with the speed of which it was built, the engineers could find no fault in the construction, but did have a few choice words about the flowery and elven motifs that decorated the buildings, which of course were inferior to fine dwarven craft in their opinion. The command truck was driven to sit beside the building in order to keep communications up and nearby to the new headquarters, allowing for a swift relay of messages and news. A few days after this, all vehicles of the 2nd Division had a place to lay their motor-powered heads and be out of the weather, which also included their crews and those of the infantry who did not want to rent rooms in Tallwheat. Towers were manned, mortar dugouts were formed from the ground, and Tallwheat now came to enjoy the presence of an entire Veil Rider division to safeguard them from any threat that may come their way. A steady supply of fuel and generators also meant that Gremlin was able to get her drones back up in the air, and the information they were feeding back caused the 2nd Division to begin buzzing anew. A week after moving into this new home away from home, Yule was sitting down to a cup of tea in the late afternoon when Prince Nim stepped into the open sitting room, which had been converted into a part dining area and sitting area so everyone could talk openly. Yule gestured at him with a cup while the rest of the troopers assigned to Yule's own bodyguard all raised their hands or hats in salute. The lone wanderers reading the local paper in the corner raised their eyes to the elven prince but did not make much else of a move. Yule smiled pleasantly, having been getting more sleep in this home with Olivara. "Prince, you've been scarce these last few days. Good to see you again." This was a lie, as Yule had Gremlin put the prince under drone surveillance, as well as harpies dogging his tail every chance they got. According to Gremlin and her spies, the prince had been in the capital talking to his father, and the elf looked worse for wear.
Yes, I have been busy.
Prince Nim pulled out a chair tiredly and sat down next to Yule, and a nearby dwarven staff sergeant saw how dogged the elf looked and fetched him an ale. Nim smiled at the dwarf as he set down the tankard in front of him, and he took it with both hands.
Oh, thank you, Staff Sergeant. Staff Sergeant, yes, because his rank has one smile below the 3 eyebrows.
Aye, Princeling. Be careful, or else Yule there will have to promote me. Yule chuckled. If you keep up the good work, I just might have to. One of the humans called out, "Suck up," from behind their paper, and the dwarf blew a raspberry in their direction before going back to his own chair nearby. "What has had you busy, Prince?" Yule asked, bringing the mug to his lips. For some reason, the elves here liked their tea as cold as they could get it, and reminded Yule a bit of home in the Midwest of America.
Well, I have been speaking to my father and brothers.
Nim took a sip from the tankard, and Yule reckoned the foam on his lips would be the closest he would ever get to facial hair. How'd that go? Prince Nim partially grimaced, and took another sip from the tankard before exhaling.
They are fully in the hand of the chosen children. The capital is being used as a staging ground for their forces, and I saw some of their vehicles while I was there. They look as if they are preparing to move here and try to wipe you out.
That all, eh? Yule said with a smile. Prince Nim looked at him like he was mad.
Yule, they are coming with entire armies. Not just my father's, but every one of my brothers has been given gifts from the Fae. They are all pledged. They have also hired mercenaries, recruited any locals who were aligned with the Fae, as well as 3 whole raiding bands of orcs from the north. And they are going to be here in...
Yule cut him off politely in a soft tone. In 4 days. We know. We've been watching their progress. Also, kudos to you for escaping your arrest in the castle. We watched it live. The drone had gotten the perfect view of Prince Nim scaling down his window and dropping down into a roof outside the royal kitchens. The harpies watching along with the drone were outfitted with experimental in-ear receivers and were being fed orders from Yule in the command vehicle, who was ringed with every human who could fit inside. Nim led a merry chase along the rooftops through several districts, outrunning guards and town watch with speed and dexterity that would make the legends of elven princes proud. There had been a few instances where he was about to be cornered in his run, but a quick order to a sparrow harpy with modified grenades made quick work of a wall, a bunched up group of guards, and at one point even blasted the doors off the royal stables well in advance so Prince Nim could get a horse.
The explosions. That was you!
Prince Nim exclaimed and slapped his hands on top of the table with a laugh.
That was you! You blew the doors apart from the stables and opened the main gate!
Yule nodded. The female sparrow harpy who called herself Reeves had been quite proud of herself for stuffing the gate winch with her grenades and setting it off without being detected. You hadn't shown up in a few days to bug me or ask me how the training was going for your garrison, so I assumed you used one of those paper spells to go try and talk to the family. I'm not surprised, after all, as royals rarely ever answer to those below them.
Yule,
Prince Nim began, but Yule held up his hand. Not needed. I get it. But trust me, we are well aware of what's coming our way and we are as ready as we can be. They're already moving to try and cut us off from the roads to the east and do away with our supply lines. We've fanned out a bit to stop that and let all of our cops know what's coming. Also, your uniform is ready. Prince Nim blinked his eyes a bit and cocked his head with a frail smile.
My uniform?
Yule nodded again, and from around the corner came Violet holding a bundle of clothes in her hands, a set of standard-issue black boots, and a holster with an M9 pistol in it.
Oh yeah, my little snack lunch. You're gonna be looking like one of us when the brass begins to sing.
He's a prince. Please refrain from calling him a sack lunch, Vanali said tersely, coming around the back end of Violet and fussing with his top button. Vanali's uniform had to be custom made in order to accommodate his stomach, and Yule hoped it would encourage the elf to lose some weight. The humans reading their paper cocked their heads as if hearing something in the distance and folded the pages down. After setting their reading materials on the side tables, one gave a whistle, and suddenly dozens of humans bustled up from their rooms, already tossing on their war gear and rushing out the door with a stomp of boots. Prince Nim looked around in alarm, and Yule drained his mug before setting it back down on the table. The humans sighed and looked towards Nim with a smile that held more sadness than one should. I hope you're ready, kid. If we don't keep sharp, this entire city is going to burn. You understand that, don't you? Nim was quiet as he mulled the words over in his head, but he steeled himself and nodded towards Yule.
Yes, I understand.
Good, Yule said, and stood up from his chair as the door opened as soon as it closed, and Captain Fadithas trotted in with a radio set to her ear and her haggard radio operator loping behind her. Behind her, in the sky beyond the door, multiple flares were arcing into the sky. Because the opening salvos were just fired but a few seconds ago, and the skirmishing begins. War has come to baptize you in its flame. And that's the end of this chapter of the Veil Riders. The cottonmouth is real today. Blech. If you enjoyed the story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to Garbeardia Beardio, where you can find more of these freshly written stories and completely original content written through the week, videos through the week, through the month, whatever. I do my best, alright? If you want to help keep the channel running beyond, I know a lot of you guys run ad blockers, I get it. But if you want to help the channel out, there's a coffee link where you can give $1 or $2 if you feel like it, or you can buy a book on Amazon and leave a fun review if you so choose. Also be sure to stop by Skull Splitter Dice Redcon 1 for all your protein and energy needs, and stop by the Discord link, which we will have back up fully running here in a bit. There's a bit of a hoopla with the Discord. But until I see you next time on this side of the veil, this has been Guard Bro, that was the Bell Dam, and this is Garbeardia.